Hello everyone, I'm back again. Bondi's left me. Bondi. Might call him over, see if he wants to hang out. Hey buddy, you wanna say hi to the people? Look at those beautiful eyes. Isn't he a cute boy? Can you sit? Sit. Okay, ready? No, sit. Can you shake? Shake, look how clever he is. He's a good boy. Okay. Sorry for disturbing you. Alright. We'll get back to it. Got the angle right, so should he choose to sit here, you'll be able to see him. Do you want to go back on your bed? Anyway, sorry, that was 40 seconds of not learning. So what we're going to look at is gender and sexuality. So don't forget up the top of the page of the contents to highlight when you're doing this. So these two concepts, they are different things, despite what are they here. Gender and sexuality are different. They are closely related in some ways and some elements, but not in every way. So there's definitely correlation between the two, but they are different things. So we'll start with gender. So according to our syllabus, gender is the socially constructed differences between males and females. And what I've put here is not the biological or anatomical differences, because that is what we call sex. And not in the intercourse way, but in the defining of anatomy between the two anatomies that most people are likely born with. I'm not going to say this live on camera because I'm immature. I'm not immature, but you're immature and you'll make fun of me for it. But anyway, so it's not the biological or anatomical differences between a penis or a vagina, but it is the gender and socially constructed differences between males and females, or masculine and feminine characteristics. So that's how our syllabus defines it anyway. And that syllabus definition in this subject is the king, because that's where your HSC questions will be drawn from and asked about. So over time, society and culture have established rules, norms and behaviour and social roles regarding gender experiences and interpretations of gender. So for example, traditional stereotypes portray women in a domestic setting. And likewise, the traditional stereotypes portray men in a workplace or breadwinner sort of sense, in a traditional capacity. And that's influenced by those socially constructed differences between males and females. So our actions and reactions to these rules and expectations, they continue to shape gender roles in our world today. So the traditional roles still exist in a lot of micro worlds around the globes, and indeed in a lot of macro level societies too. In our particular westernized culture, it's changing a lot, and it's changing in other cultures that aren't particularly Western as well, although you could say they're becoming more westernized because they're changing to conform to Western standards, but that's another lesson for another day. But we're seeing more progressive gender roles in society emerging, such as women in the workplace and males and men becoming the primary caretaker of the family and things like that. But it's not something that, or this next activity rather, is not something that someone thinks about very often. I don't think people realize how important, or how influential is probably the better word, although it's important too, how influential gender is to every single decision that you make in a day. It's something that is so sometimes, like, we can call out this idea that you know, men used to be the guys that had to go out and work, but now the stereotype of that is breaking down. And even masculine stereotypes, that you can be a man and have feminine qualities, and you can be a female and have masculine qualities, is something that, you know, in the past 10, 15 years is only something that's starting to be brought to light. But I guess if I pull back from my tangent, the main idea is that we can see sort of these big picture things where gender influences and changes things, but we don't often think about all the small little nuanced things that influence our day every single day, which are based off these socially constructed differences between males and females. And I want you to fill this table with every single decision that you have made today up until this very point where you're writing this, that has been based around the social constructions of gender. And I'm talking little minutiae things. I'm going to give you some details to help, okay? So for me, first thing I do is I get up out of bed, brush my teeth. Guess what color my toothbrush is? It's usually a manly orange or green or blue. I don't have a pink toothbrush. I don't have a purple toothbrush. My wife uses a pink and purple toothbrush. So we differentiate our toothbrush by these socially constructed differences, that males have more masculine colors, or things that are socially constructed to mean more masculine. Although ironically, pink used to be considered the masculine color because pink was a more bright and fervent color, and blue is more placid and suited the female better. So that is interesting that that's changed over time in of itself. But something as little as my toothbrush, the clothes that I put on to work. I don't think you guys have seen me wearing a dress to work. And you're probably very grateful for that in some ways. But that is because typically, and in a traditional sense, the ideas of merging masculinity with dresses is a socially constructed clash, I guess. Now, obviously, that is breaking down over time. There are a lot of predominant macro level figures who are, I guess, challenging those stereotypes of identifying as a man and doing feminine characteristics and vice versa. But I want to talk about you today. So even when you look at our school uniform that you put on the day before is influenced by gender expectations. The color of your pencil case, the types of food that you eat, the portion sizes of the food you eat. You know, in your family, if you have a brother or a father, do they get more food on the plate than you do because it's considered a masculine thing to eat more food? Like, I want you to think that kind of level and depth. You know, is your hair length when you're brushing it in the morning? Are you putting on makeup? Like, all of those sort of minute decisions. And even when you get to school, like, you know, we segregate toilets by gender. So, like, literally, think it down to the minute detail. I want you to fill in everything. After you've done that, I have a interesting activity. So we're going to do a content analysis of an article that was written in a 1959 women's magazine called McCallus. And the magazine article was 129 ways to get a husband. So, if you are, you know, if this is something you think about a lot of the time, how do you need to get a husband? This is a great article that has some interesting ideas in it, such as, you know, number 24, don't be afraid to associate with more attractive girls. They may have some leftovers. Or something like, don't whine. Girls who whine stay on the vine. Or, yeah. Or if he's rich, tell him you like his money. The honesty will intrigue him. And then you've got stuff like wild ideas, anything goes. Stow away on a battleship. If your mother's fat, tell him you take after your father. And if he's fat, tell him you're adopted. Or the most crazy thing, you know, ask your mother to take in random male boarders. I'm sure that's a very safe way to get a husband. So look through all these articles, and the idea behind it is I want you to examine how gender stereotypes have changed over time. So, as you're reading this, I would like you to highlight your top 10 ways that you think are, I guess, the most ridiculous, or the things that stand out to you the most that you just think is just absurd. Like, I don't know, don't tell him how much your clothes cost or something like that. So I want you to highlight the 10 that you think are the most crazy, and then of those 10 you have space underneath here. What I want you to do is write down, actually, so write down your top 10 articles that you think is crazy here. So it might be, you might write number 66, 68, 102, 7, and then highlight them on here. And then on this page, right, I want you to tell me what specific gender stereotype it relates to. So let's say you listed here number, I don't know, 100, you know, learn where to draw the line, but do it gracefully. You know, does that last part, do it gracefully, link to that gender stereotype or idea that women need to be docile, that they need to submit to male authority? Is that the sort of gender social construct that is sitting behind that? So I hope that makes sense. I might recap because I think I'm even confused in my own explanation. Highlight, just ignore what I said earlier. Highlight your top 10 here, right? And then on either of these pages, I want you to list, let's go 5 per page. List 5 here and 5 here. And then I want you to unpack what gender stereotype is behind this way of getting a husband. So we looked at 100 as an example, that women need to be docile and submit to male authority. That might be all you write. So you might write 100. Here's a free one. You might write 100 and then go, women should submit to male authority and be more docile. And that is the gender stereotype that is behind this sort of idea of how to get a husband. I hope that makes sense. If you're still confused, come and see me. Moving on from that, we're going to now look at sexuality. So this is another thing that influences our socialization quite heavily. It is somewhat, it does not have really any grounding or basing in gender, although typically people who identify as male or female typically have certain attractions. However, there's lots of varying ranges of sexuality. And sexuality is not just, in this term of sexuality, we're not just looking at an attraction to a particular sex, to a particular gender, or to a particular sexuality. We're also looking at sort of sexual behavior as part of this in the socialization process, because it really does shape how we act in society, because there are a lot of social constructs surrounding sexuality. So like, for example, we see the social constructs surrounding sexuality of homosexual men being that they are stereotypically flamboyant, a higher pitched voice as an example, whereas there is another trope or stereotype with sexuality for lesbian women that, again, stereotypically they're more butch, they're macho, they may have tattoos, you know, like brightly coloured hair. Again, all of these socially constructed tropes and stereotypes, but they exist within our society based on how people deem people with certain sexualities should behave. So, without further ado, sexual behaviour is learnt through the socialisation process. So generally speaking, parents, schools, peers, and the media, they are the main influences of an adolescent's understanding of their sexuality. So it comes from a lot of primary and secondary socialization agents. I would probably say, colloquially, that secondary socialization agents are doing a lot more in teaching about sexuality now, typically, than primary socialization agents, and that's just based off my experience as a teacher. A lot of young people are getting diverse ideas about sexuality and exploring the sexuality through secondary socialization agents such as peers, such as social media, for example. But that's not to deny that there's also education based on that at schools and with parents as well. But it's becoming a lot more diverse, and people's understanding of it are very much shaped by other social institutions. The other thing with sexuality too is that people become aware of sex at different times, as there's a diverse range of puberty onset. There's no sort of set range or set age for people where puberty starts. There is a clear range, and some people fall outside of that range. Some people hit puberty very early, some people peak and hit puberty very late on. And so this idea, and then there's the idea of maturity of the individual that plays into it as well, your genetics, pardon me, all those other things play into it. So, but people become aware of sex or their sexuality at different times depending on their puberty onset. However though, contemporary adolescence awareness and perceptions and expectations surrounding sexual activity has changed significantly over time as Western society is currently saturated with sexual imagery and content. If you guys, I want to challenge you actually to do it right now, open your Instagram on your phone, and I want you to scroll for 2 minutes, and I just want you to tally, do an observation. I want you to actually a quantitative content analysis. I just want you to tally the number of images on your personal social Instagram feed which have sexual imagery or content or connotations attached to them. So for example, well actually I'm not going to say for example, you can be the judge of that, but I just want you to tally it quickly on the side here and just write a number. You could tally and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or you can just write the raw number here, just draw a little arrow. I'm just curious to see how many. And if you want as well, the other thing you can do is you can hit the search tab in your Instagram thing, or even if you want to go to TikTok and do the first 10 videos, I want you to tell me how many of those are saturated with either sexual imagery, content, or connotations. So connotations being suggested sexual jokes or anything like that. But it's saturated to such an extent that you can see in a lot of forms of children's toys, such as Barbies, to movies and social media accounts, which is, I guess, the challenge I just put forward to you guys there. We're going to look at lol dolls here as an example. So once you've done that social media exercise, I would like you just do a quick Google search of lol dolls, and as you can see from this imagery here, what they found was that I believe it was once they got soaked in water, the clothing that was attached to these lol dolls, they found, I think they've since fixed it, but originally, once the water melted it all away, the lol dolls would have clothing such as you can see here on the left. So obviously this is highly sexualized in nature, given the fishnet stockings, the thong here, covering the breasts with just a ribbon. And then this is just one example of it. Like, look it up and Google, you can see heaps of different examples of it. But the idea that these toys were marketed towards really young kids, like I'm talking kids around kindergarten sort of age, so 4, 5, 6, 7, probably not 7, probably a bit younger than that. But these dolls resembled a lot of adult sexual content, and they were available in every kid's store that you could see. So that's, I guess, another example of how hypersexualized our society has become, and that is really shaping the way that people view sexuality. Yes, it's more diverse, but sometimes the argument is, has it gone too far, and to the extent that like young kids are being exposed to this. And if you look at what's that Netflix show? I think it's called Cuties. Maybe look it up. But yeah, so you're even seeing it in our media everywhere. So another thing that we can see is that, for example, due to the globalized technology industry, attitudes towards sexuality is being shaped by the adult film industry, also known as porn, and that is easily accessible for adolescents. So for many which this is their first experience with any kind of sexual activity. So typically, this is what I was saying earlier, typically any sort of learned behaviors about sexuality and sex a while ago was taught in the primary socialization agent of family, and then again sometimes it wasn't, but typically a lot of this is being discovered in the secondary socialization agent phase, whether it's from peers as well, but or social media or the internet. And I guess the argument here, we're going to look at both sides here, is that often things like porn portrays an unrealistic standard, or unrealistic sex standards, sorry, so you can get your word bank in, and it conveys that sexuality can be considered abusive or abnormal in some ways, and some research showing the very negative or harmful effects of consuming that sort of material and the damaging implications it can have on how people view sexuality. But on the contrary, some argue that, or many argue that, exploring all realms of sexuality is healthy, as people can understand and gauge their desired sexuality more accurately. It may also allow individuals to express their identity better and feel a greater sense of belonging with sexualities that were previously seen as taboo. So there's a lot of really great work out there raising awareness for things like same-sex attraction that we can see in the Mardi Gras parade, and a lot of, I guess, what's the word? What's it called? The same-sex version of Tinder. I can't remember what it's called. But we're seeing a lot more macro level acceptance of sexuality occurring as part of the socialization process over time. So I guess that's a bit more of a deep dive into that aspect. What I want you to do, I've just realized something. I've realized, I asked you to do something here about tallying your social media. This is what I want you to do here anyway. Alright, so we're going to do it properly. So an activity I want you to do with sexuality is, I would like you to go to your Instagram feed, Facebook news feed, Snapchat news stories, TikTok, whatever it is. Go for what I call, go for a scroll instead of a stroll. Go for a scroll. Anyway, go for a scroll for 15 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes and conduct the research method of observation / quantitative content analysis, which is also what this is. So whilst actually it's really just content analysis, cross that out and fix it up. That'd be great. Oops, typo. We all make mistakes, being vulnerable here, but yeah, it's a quantitative content analysis. So whilst you're scrolling, I want you to count the number of posts that appear in your feed, whatever app you're using, that are sexualized. Boom, 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 boom. I then want you to list the potential reasons why, or any potential reasons why, or any trends or commonalities that you see between each post, and note them here. Then the second activity is I want you to respond to this following question. Is there an overemphasis on sexuality? So overemphasis meaning, is it a bit over the top? Is there an overemphasis on sexuality in society, or is it society's emphasis on sexuality an appropriate reality? So if I was to reframe that, I guess in more simple terms, do we think that there's too much over-sexualization in society happening, or do you think that that's just an objective and appropriate reality of the world that we live in today, and that it should be more normalized? What do you think? And that's your lesson. Thanks.